I just wanted to say that I hold a chair endowed by a very generous family. It's not mentioned in the materials, so I did want to thank the Robert and Marion Short family for my endowed chair at Notre Dame. My assignment today is the regulation of AI-enabled, fully autonomous robotic weapons. So after years of work on unmanned systems and now AI, I have concluded that the only way to regulate AI weapons is to ban them. The ongoing debate over a ban reflects two very different perspectives. One sees the development of such weapons as an essential part of national security that depends on a strong military in possession of the latest lethal technology. If legal or ethical norms impede staying ahead in the arms race, those norms need to be reinterpreted or modified. The other perspective maintains that security depends first and foremost on robust respect for legal principles that are derived from fundamental moral principles. Such principles are not subject to reinterpretation or modification. The proper role for the military and law enforcement authorities is defending the rule of law, not superseding it. The military superiority perspective has been shaped by the 20th century political theory of realism. This theory helps account for why major militaries today spend far more on weapons development than on green technologies, or poverty elimination, or international governance institutions. It also helps explain why China, Russia, and the United States have made a common cause in trying to prevent an AI ban. The other perspective dates to the emergence of law among the earliest human communities as an alternative to physical force in the ordering of society. This law perspective has been shaped by the theory of natural law that combines legal and moral teaching and can be seen in the efforts of the vast majority of states, technologists, civil society movements like the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, and the Vatican to achieve a ban. According to the US DoD, AI weapons are a special class of weapon system that uses sensor suites and computer algorithms to independently identify a person or persons and objects to kill or destroy without any human intervention. AI weapons go a significant step beyond unmanned systems or drones by being programmable to select targets unknown at the time the weapon is deployed. Also, unlike current drones, there is simply no need for a human operator to be associated with the weapon after programming. Weapon systems can roam in search of targets without regard to time, place, or human oversight. Any restrictive parameters included in the original programming can then be superseded by the computer learning algorithm. The complexity of computer learning functions means that the most advanced computer scientists simply cannot foresee what decisions the computerized weapon system will reach. Learning programs are consistently characterized, as we heard yesterday, as a black box, meaning it's impossible to predict how a computer learning program will reach decisions, owing to the problem of overseeing massive data inputs and understanding how the algorithm will work with them. The algorithms are black boxes to their creators. They simply cannot map out the decision-making process to be able to predict outcomes of these complex networks of artificial neurons. Analysts advocating in favor of AI weapons assume that they will deploy, they've got battlefield comparisons in mind. They assume that they'll deploy missiles and bombs for use on a legally defined battlefield only. But let me explain to you that the very first use of a weaponized drone, which did deploy a battlefield weapon, the Hellfire missile designed to kill tanks, was not deployed on a legally defined battlefield. It was used by the CIA to attempt to carry out an assassination far from any armed conflict hostilities in the year 2000. The drone case provides no assurance that AI weapons will be deployed only on a battlefield, even before the learning program takes over and makes its own decisions about where, when, and why to use lethal force. Thus, the potential scenarios involved are myriad. And that means that the relevant law that we need to be considering is much broader than is often heard in such conversations. It has to begin with the law of human rights and then move on to the law on resort to force, the jus ad bellum, which includes not only the UN Charter, but general principles of international law, and then on to the law governing conduct of force, the jus in bello, and then, of course, also arms control law. Under human rights law, authorized law enforcement agents may use lethal force in only one situation to save a life immediately. That means that there is a rule against any collateral damage. No risk to innocent bystanders is tolerated. And thus, it is unlawful in peacetime to use battlefield-level weapons. Missiles, bombs, simply unlawful. Moving on to the Charter and the law on resort to force, which begins with Article 2.4 in the Charter, that codification of the ancient just war prohibition on the use of force, states that any use of force, and this was meant to be all-inclusive, providing no loopholes, any use of interstate force is prohibited. The two express exceptions in the UN Charter we rarely hear in their precise wording because they have been so exaggerated and manipulated over time. So let me just repeat briefly that only the Security Council may authorize in situations outside the narrow confines of Article 51. But we're not going to see Security Council authorizations of the use of force for the foreseeable future. Not only has the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine had an impact, but there was already a disinterest in further authorizations given the very poor results of peace enforcement operations, and then, of course, the use of force that was authorized in Libya, highly criticized by China and Russia for abuse of that authorization and the resulting ongoing civil war. Other than Security Council authorization, we have Article 51, regulating resort to force by states in self-defense. Article 51 says that force is permitted in the situation of self-defense if an armed attack occurs, and then only until the Security Council acts. So temporary emergency right to use force of this kind. The defending state must promptly report their actions. In addition, restrictions from general international law apply. Most importantly are the principles not only of necessity and proportionality that we heard from Edward yesterday, but also attribution. Attribution mandates that any use of force in self-defense must aim only at a state responsible for a significant armed attack on the defending state. Even then, a counterattack must be necessary to achieve legitimate defense and must be proportionate to the injury sustained. Defending states may request assistance in collective self-defense, but those requests have to come from a government in effective control, not the Republic of Luhansk. Effective control is the standard test in international law for identifying an entity with authority to request assistance by invitation. If self-defense turns into armed conflict, which is defined as intense exchange of armed fighting of some duration, international law permits the armed forces of a party to the conflict to intentionally target the armed forces of the adversary. All targeting within armed conflict is governed by the four fundamental principles we also heard about yesterday. Distinction, necessity, proportionality, but we did not hear about humanity. That is the fourth. These and other in bello rules mean that certain weapons are unlawful to use, such as weapons that kill indiscriminately or that cause unnecessary suffering. During the Cold War, the two superpowers justified intervention after intervention on the basis of false facts, some of which they manipulated themselves, often through assassination. They rarely, if ever, actually tried to manipulate the law. With the end of the Cold War, the US began doing just that. First, it said little or nothing, using military force in clear violation of international law, attempting to do so clandestinely. And then it started inventing new legal claims. To justify drone strikes beyond armed conflict zones, for example, the US has cycled through no fewer than 4 approaches. First, it tried to maintain that these were covert operations, no comment, but of course it's hard to keep bombing attacks secret. Moved on, declaring a global war on terrorism. Everything is under in bello, no ad bellum. That, of course, did not coincide with the facts. then moved on to reinterpreting Article 51, a truly dangerous path, trying to argue that it's permitted to use attacks today to preempt potential threats in the future. Now the US has moved on to its fourth, current one being used, declaring that a state is unable or unwilling to resolve a terrorist threat on its territory, and that permits the United States to attack. I believe this is the weakest of all of the four, in that it lacks all features of legality by depending completely on a subjective assessment by Washington in place of the objective evidence of an armed attack under Article 51. I would be more concerned about this particular argument, or I am particularly concerned because our NATO partners, for example, consistently failed to object to its invocation. These attempts to stretch the law to meet policy overlook the fact that prohibition on the use of force and the inherent dignity of human beings are premised on enduring natural law precepts and principles. They are peremptory, natural law, norms of jus cogens, simply not subject to diminution, derogation, through reinterpretation, treaty modification, or new rules of customary international law. Such norms endure, regardless of technological developments. All of this law, which aims at protecting the human right to life and the preservation of the natural environment, supplies the normative basis for the worldwide movement to ban AI weapons. Opponents of the ban have responded to the movement with various arguments, in addition to the realist belief and advocacy of staying ahead in the arms race. Two stand out in the brief time I have left. First, defenders of weapons argue, as we heard from Warren Surf yesterday, that the weapons will follow norms and law more closely than human beings. And second, and we hear this often in the US, regardless of the law and morality, it is better to adjust the law to make AI weapons use lawful, or else the law and morality will simply be ignored. So if you want a country like the US to be compliant with the law, then change the law, because these weapons will be used. With respect to AI weapons being superior to human operators, the arguments inevitably fail to grapple with the fact that AI learning functions lead to unknowable outcomes. Predicting whether a robot will decide to resort to force in violation of international law or not simply cannot be known. Moreover, programming may incorporate flawed views on when to resort to force, such as those four arguments by the US or Russia's arguments for invading Ukraine. In addition to unlawful resort to force, AI weapons must be treated as though they could potentially kill indiscriminately. Programmers simply do not know who will be killed, how many people will be killed, where they will be killed, or why they will be killed. To me, that's the definition of an indiscriminate use of military force. One author argues that the unrestricted employment of a completely unpredictable autonomous weapon system that behaves in entirely unintelligible ways would likely be regarded as universally injudicious and illegal. It should be. Even if the black box problem can be solved, the missing human conscience is an insurmountable barrier. Archbishop Silvano Tomasi emphasized at the Conference on Certain Conventional Weapons in Geneva, on behalf of the Holy See, that decisions over life and death inherently call for human qualities, such as compassion and insight. He went on to say that although imperfect human beings may not perfectly apply such qualities in the heat of war, these qualities are neither replaceable nor programmable. Regardless of how sophisticated computers become in exemplifying compassion, empathy, altruism, emotion, or other qualities, the machine will be mimicking, not experiencing them, as only a human being can. A further argument holds that the ban is pointless, so just regulate on the margin. A ban is not pointless. Even if major military and high-tech states ignore it, a ban makes clear that states deploying AI weapons are lawbreakers. Should the CCCW not reach a protocol banning AI weapons, a specific treaty is needed like that for the banning nuclear weapons, to educate, to build a coalition against the next generation of AI WMDs. Such a ban means, in the thinking of the prominent computer scientist Noah Sharkey, that a human being must have full contextual and situational awareness of a specific attack, the ability to perceive unexpected changes in circumstances, retention of power to suspend or abort the attack, and time for deliberation on the significance of the attack. Cardinal Turkson, I think this calls for a new Pacem in Terris 2 for the AI era. Thank you.